She walked into the restaurant carrying a painting no one knew existed, one that would soon stop every conversation. And that moment, quietly, came. The night began like every other, except for the painting she had hidden beneath her coat. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows of the Mariner's Table, a restaurant where the rich came to dine by the sea and never looked twice at the people who served them. Inside, warm light spilled across linen-covered tables and silver cutlery gleamed like small trophies of success. Evelyn Moore, a 46-year-old widow, moved quietly through it all, her black uniform blending into the shadows between laughter and music. To most, she wasn't really there, just part of the decor, like the candles or the sound of the waves beyond the glass. Evelyn had learned to live inside that invisibility. 6 years ago, when her husband's sudden death left her with unpaid bills and unfinished dreams, she traded her paints for an apron and told herself it was only temporary. But time had a way of settling like dust. Now her brushes were gone, her canvases sold, her colors faded to memory. Still, every evening when she polished glasses, she caught glimpses of reflected light, streaks of red or blue that her mind insisted on painting back into the world. "Evelyn," called Lydia, the younger waitress, snapping her out of thought. "Table 6 is waiting." "They're the picky ones," she smiled faintly. "They always are." At table 6, 3 men in pressed suits were already mid-conversation, their laughter quick and sharp like breaking glass. Evelyn placed their plates carefully, keeping her eyes lowered. One of them leaned toward her. "You've been here a while, haven't you?" "Almost 6 years, sir." He grinned at his friend. "See? That's loyalty or desperation." They laughed, and Evelyn forced a polite smile. The sting wasn't new. It was almost routine by now. She turned away before the heat could rise in her face, focusing instead on the next task, the next order, the next reason to stay invisible. Behind the counter stood Richard Hale, the restaurant's owner, a man with silver hair, a watch that caught every light in the room, and a habit of speaking as if the world waited to hear him. "Tomorrow's the anniversary dinner," he said, glancing over the staff. "This place needs some class. The walls are empty, maybe a painting or two." Something light, nothing too gloomy. His eyes landed on Evelyn. "You used to paint, right?" "Bring something in if you know anyone with talent." Evelyn hesitated. "Yes, sir. I might know someone." He was already moving on. "Good. Just make sure it looks expensive." That night, after closing, the sea air bit at her cheeks as she walked home. The boardwalk lights shimmered on the wet planks like spilled stars. Her small apartment waited, quiet, colorless, except for one canvas leaning against the wall. It was her last remaining piece, painted years ago during the week her husband had still been alive. A sunrise over calm water, grief and hope tangled in soft hues. Dust had dulled it, but the heart of it still glowed beneath the surface. She ran her fingers along the frame. "One night," she murmured, "you'll see the light again." The next day was a blur of orders and polish. The Mariner's Table was dressing up for its 10th anniversary, mayor attending, local paper covering, every surface expected to shine. Evelyn wrapped her painting in brown paper and slipped it under her arm, heart thudding. When she arrived, Richard barely looked up. "That from your artist friend?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Hang it on the west wall near the piano." The frame clicked into place and Evelyn stepped back. Under the restaurant lights, the sunrise seemed alive again, the brushstrokes whispering of loss and resilience. Lydia stopped beside her. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised. "Who painted it?" Evelyn's lips curved faintly. "Someone who used to." By 7, the restaurant shimmered with movement. Wine pouring, violins humming softly, laughter rising above the clink of glass. Evelyn served table after table, her focus tight and measured. She avoided looking toward the painting, afraid it might betray too much of her. But near the west wall, Claire Hale, Richard's wife, had stopped mid-conversation. Her hand rested lightly over her chest, eyes fixed on the painting. She beckoned her husband. "Look at this," she whispered. Richard frowned, studying it. "Who brought this in?" he asked, voice carrying over the music. Lydia pointed toward the bar. Evelyn did. Dozens of heads turned. Evelyn felt the heat of attention she had spent years avoiding. Richard arched an eyebrow. You painted that? Yes, sir. A small laugh slipped from his lips, polite but dismissive. Well, our waitress is full of surprises. The crowd joined in, their laughter echoing through the hall like hollow applause. Evelyn bowed her head, murmured an excuse, and slipped back into the kitchen. The sound of the door swinging shut behind her was louder than the laughter itself. In the solitude of the stainless steel counter, she set down her tray, breath trembling. Through the narrow window, she could still see the edge of her painting glowing under the light. They had laughed, but not for long. The painting had already begun to speak for her. The laughter from the dining room lingered like a stain. Behind the swinging kitchen door, Evelyn stood still, her breath shallow against the hum of the refrigerators. The cooks barely noticed her. They were too busy plating lobster tails, shouting orders, pretending the world outside the kitchen didn't exist. She stared at her trembling hands and wondered why she'd brought the painting at all. On the other side of that door, her sunrise waited, silent, patient, untouchable. The dinner carried on. Music swelled, glasses clinked, applause rose for speeches. Richard Hale's voice filled the hall, thanking patrons and praising the restaurant's dedicated staff. His wife, Claire, stood slightly apart, her eyes drifting again toward the painting on the west wall. When Evelyn returned to clear a table, she felt that gaze before she heard the voice. Miss, Claire said softly, that painting, it's extraordinary. Who's the artist? Evelyn hesitated. Around them, conversation faltered, then quieted. It was mine, she said, for a heartbeat silence. Then polite chuckles broke the tension. Richard cleared his throat. You see, my wife has an eye for beauty, he said. Who knew it was right under our noses? Laughter again, shallow and awkward, but Claire didn't laugh. Her eyes, warm and searching, didn't leave Evelyn's face. You painted this yourself? Yes, ma'am. It feels like it remembers something. Evelyn blinked, startled. No one had ever described her work like that. The soft notes of the jazz band faded, and the room shifted. The mayor had walked closer. A few guests followed, their voices dropping to murmurs as they studied the painting. Someone whispered, "It's beautiful." Another said, "Look at that light." The crowd that had dismissed her minutes ago was now standing in a hush before the thing they couldn't laugh away. Evelyn stayed at the edge of the room, afraid to move. She watched Richard step beside his wife, pride fading into confusion. You really painted that? He asked again, quieter this time. She nodded. Where did you learn? I studied at the academy before I was married, she said simply. Then life got in the way. There was no self-pity, just truth. The waves pressed softly against the glass windows. Claire touched her husband's arm. It's remarkable, Richard. This should never have been hidden. The owner looked around. His guests, his wife, the painting, and something in him cracked, though he hid it behind a short nod. Perhaps we'll leave it up for a while, he said, but the guests didn't move. They stood watching the painted sunrise, the light of it merging with the flicker of candles. Some were crying. Not loudly, just quiet tears, the kind that come from recognizing something human. Evelyn's chest felt too tight to breathe. Lydia approached from the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. I didn't know you could do that. Evelyn smiled faintly. Neither did they. An hour later, when the crowd thinned and the band packed up, Richard approached again. Mrs. Moore, he began, awkward now, I'd like to keep your painting here. Permanently, if you'll allow it. It deserves the light. Evelyn looked toward the wall. The painting's reflection shimmered in the window glass, glowing against the dark sea. You can keep it, she said. It was meant to be seen. He hesitated. I misjudged you. She met his eyes without bitterness. Most people do. When the restaurant emptied, she stayed behind to wipe the tables. The silence was different now, gentler, fuller. From the west wall, her painting caught the last light from the chandeliers, the sunrise within it seeming to breathe. Claire returned quietly, slipping an envelope onto the counter. For you, she said. You shouldn't stop. Evelyn opened it later at home, a note in delicate handwriting. Your art belongs here. So do you. She set it beside the window where morning would arrive. Then she turned toward her small easel, untouched for years, and began mixing colors again. Soft pink, pale gold, and a hint of blue. Outside, the sea carried the reflection of a dawn both painted and real. Inside, Evelyn smiled. Her art had spoken, and the world at last had listened.